"You're not coming to the wedding." Mom texted coldly, so I canceled everything they didn't know I paid for. My name is Grace, and I'm in my early 30s. The text came on a Tuesday morning while I was drinking cold coffee in my tiny kitchen. The city outside my window was humming with life, but inside everything was still. I was staring at a spreadsheet on my laptop, trying to make numbers line up for a client, when my phone buzzed. It was from my mother. "You're not coming to the wedding. Lily's family doesn't want you there." No apology, no explanation, just cold gray words on my screen. I read them once, then twice. The letters didn't change. It felt like a punch to the gut, but a familiar one, the kind I had learned to expect. For a moment, the world felt like it was tilting, the floor unsteady beneath my feet. My sister, my only sister, was getting married, and I was being uninvited via a text message. Before I tell you how everything flipped, like and subscribe, and drop a comment to let me know where you're watching from. I stared at it for a full minute, my thumb hovering over the screen. 1,000 angry replies swirled in my head. How could you? After everything I've done? But anger wasn't the right response. Anger gave them power. It showed them they had hurt me, and that was a satisfaction I refused to give. So, I took a deep, slow breath, letting the initial shock settle into a cold, hard resolve. I typed back a single deliberate sentence. "So, you chose status over blood." I didn't wait for a reply. I didn't need one. Their silence over the years had already told me everything I needed to know. I closed the message, put my phone face down on the counter, and turned back to my laptop, but I didn't open the client's spreadsheet. Instead, I opened a new tab. I logged into the wedding planner's account, the one tied to my credit card, the one I had set up weeks ago because Mom said she was too overwhelmed with the details. I found the payment history. There it was. Venue deposit, the Oak Grove estate, $2,500, paid by Grace Miller. I clicked on the cancellation link. A little box popped up. "Are you sure you want to cancel?" "This deposit is non-refundable." A small, bitter smile touched my lips. Non-refundable. Gone. Just like all the love and energy I had poured into them. I clicked confirm. They had no idea I had paid for it in the first place. They probably thought it was a gift from the universe, something that just magically happened, like everything else I did for them. But this magic trick was over. This was just the beginning. This wasn't the first time I'd been erased. It was just the most final. Being the family's resident problem solver is a role you don't audition for. You're just cast in it one day, and you spend the rest of your life trying to learn the lines. My role was simple. Be the load-bearing wall. Be sturdy, be silent, and above all, be useful. The problem with being a wall is that people forget you're there until they need something to lean on. For my family, I was just part of the architecture of their lives, unremarkable and always present. My sister Lily was never a wall. She was the chandelier, dazzling, brilliant, the center of every room she entered. From the moment she was born 2 years after me, she seemed to sparkle. She had our mother's easy smile and our father's charming wit. I had our father's knack for numbers and our mother's tendency toward quiet observation. In the ecosystem of our family, Lily was the bright, beautiful flower, and I was the soil she grew in, necessary but dirty and out of sight. This dynamic was cemented in the small everyday moments of our childhood. Take our birthdays, for instance. Forgetting my birthday became something of a family tradition. The first time, on my 16th, was a masterclass in casual neglect. The entire week leading up to it was consumed by Lily's regional soccer championships. The house buzzed with energy. Mom was ironing Lily's jersey, Dad was mapping the route to the tournament, and Lily was practicing her victory poses in the hallway mirror. I was in the background, making sure Lily's gear was packed and her homework was done so she wouldn't fall behind. The morning of my birthday, we were all up before dawn. They were so focused on the game, so swept up in the adrenaline, that the fact it was my sweet 16 didn't even register. We won. The car ride home was a chorus of celebration. When we walked through the door, my grandparents were there for a surprise celebration. For Lily, there were balloons and a banner that said, "Congrats, champion." I spent the rest of my birthday cutting a cake for my sister and smiling until my cheeks ached. Later that night, when I was washing the dishes, my mom came into the kitchen and stopped short. A look of dawning horror crossed her face. "Oh, Grace," she whispered, her hand flying to her mouth. "Your birthday." "Oh, honey, I am so sorry." The apology was a ghost, a wisp of a thing that did nothing to fill the hollow space in my chest. The next year, for my 17th, Lily was in the running for homecoming queen. The entire week was a frenzy of dress shopping, campaign posters, and school rallies. I was the one driving her to the mall, helping her write her speech and listening to her endless anxieties. The night of the dance, I sat in the bleachers of the football field, watching as they placed a glittering tiara on her head. The crowd roared. My parents were beside me, tears in their eyes, bursting with pride. My birthday was that night. They remembered around midnight, when we got home and my dad saw a card from my aunt on the counter. "Oh, shoot," he said, looking at me with pity. "We completely forgot. Happy birthday, kiddo." He patted me on the shoulder, and that was that. By my 18th birthday, I had learned my lesson. I didn't expect anything. I went out after school, bought a single slice of chocolate cake from a bakery, and ate it in my car in the parking lot. It was a declaration of independence, a quiet acknowledgement that if I wanted to be celebrated, I would have to be the one to do it. My achievements were met with the same muted enthusiasm. They were framed in the context of their practicality, their usefulness. When I won the state-level science fair in 10th grade for a project on water purification systems, a project I had spent months on, staying late in the school lab, my dad's reaction was, "Well, that's a good skill to have. Clean water is important." He didn't come to the awards ceremony. He said he had to work. A month later, Lily won 3rd place in a local poetry contest for a short, rambling poem about a sunset. My parents had it professionally framed and hung it in the dining room. They threw a small dinner party in her honor. When I quietly pointed out the discrepancy, my mother sighed and said, "Grace, don't compare. Lily's art comes from the soul. It's a different kind of achievement." What she meant was it was a more interesting one that was easier to brag about at dinner parties. The ultimate example was college. I worked tirelessly in high school, driven by a desperate need to prove my worth and, more practically, to get away. My grades earned me a full academic scholarship to the state university. I remember showing my parents the acceptance letter, the bold print declaring a full tuition waiver. My mother scanned the document and smiled a thin, pleased smile. "Well, look at that," she said. "Our Grace, always so sensible. This will be a huge help financially." There was no talk of my potential, no excitement for my future. The headline was that I wouldn't be a financial burden. I was an asset that was finally paying off. A few years later, when Lily was accepted into a prestigious and ridiculously expensive private art school, the house erupted in celebration. My parents took out a second mortgage without a second thought. "You have to follow your passion, sweetie," my dad told her, his eyes shining with pride. "We'll make it work." They made it work for her dreams. For me, they were just relieved that my dreams came with a discount. This pattern of financial dependency on me began almost as soon as I got my first real paycheck. It wasn't a conscious decision on anyone's part. It was a slow, creeping erosion of boundaries. It started with small things. "Grace, can you pick up groceries on your way home?" "I'll pay you back," my mom would say, and then conveniently forget. "Gracie, can I borrow $50? I'm a little short until Friday," Lily would ask, and Friday would come and go. I let it happen because it was easier than the alternative. Arguing about money would make me the bad guy, the stingy, ungenerous daughter, the sister who didn't care. It was easier to just absorb the cost. The first major withdrawal from the Bank of Grace came when I was 25. My dad, who always fancied himself a bit of a stock market guru, had made a series of disastrous investments with his retirement savings. The market took a dive and he was hit with a margin call he couldn't meet. He called me, his voice choked with a panic I had never heard from him before. He was a proud man, and it was clear that this call was costing him dearly. "They're going to liquidate everything, Grace," he stammered. "Your mother's nest egg. Everything we saved. It'll all be gone." My own savings account had just crossed the $5,000 mark for the first time in my life. It was my emergency fund, my security, the physical proof of my hard work and discipline. Seeing that number grow was the one thing that made me feel safe. But hearing the terror in my father's voice, I knew what I had to do. The role had been assigned to me long ago. I was the fixer. "How much do you need, Dad?" I asked, my voice hollow. He told me the amount, $5,000, the exact amount I had. I logged into my online banking and transferred the entire sum to his account. It felt like I was transferring a part of myself, a piece of my future. "I'll pay you back, Gracie," he promised, his voice thick with relief and gratitude. "Every single penny. You saved us." A week later, the gratitude had faded. My mom posted a series of cheerful photos on her Facebook page. She and Lily were at a high-end spa, wrapped in fluffy white robes, holding champagne flutes. "Treating ourselves," the caption read. "A little mother-daughter pampering to de-stress." I stared at the photo, at their carefree smiles, and felt a cold, hard knot form in my stomach. My entire life savings, my safety net, had been transformed into their spa day. I wanted to scream. I wanted to call them and demand an explanation, but I didn't. I just closed the browser, went to the kitchen, and made myself a bowl of instant ramen. I was back to square one, but they were de-stressed. I had done my job. The incidents piled up, each one a small cut, bleeding me dry financially and emotionally. There was the time Lily decided to move to a new city with her boyfriend Zach, on a whim. They had no jobs lined up, no savings to speak of. They ran out of money within a month. The call came late one night, Lily's voice a frantic whisper. "Gracie, we're going to be evicted. The landlord is a nightmare. Zach is trying, but no one is hiring." The story was full of drama and villains, with her and Zach as the innocent victims. She needed $3,800 to cover back rent and a security deposit on a cheaper place. "It's just until Zach's first paycheck comes in," she swore. "We'll pay you back immediately." To get the money, I had to sell some stocks I had inherited from my grandmother, stocks I was saving for a down payment on a house someday. I sold them at a loss, but I sent the money. I couldn't bear the thought of my sister being homeless, no matter how reckless she had been. 2 days after the transfer cleared, she posted a picture of a new puppy, a purebred golden retriever. "Meet our new baby, Gus," she wrote. "He's helping us turn our new apartment into a real home." A puppy that must have cost at least $1,000. A puppy they couldn't afford. A puppy bought with my down payment money. I didn't call. I didn't text. I just added it to the silent tally I was keeping in my head, the long list of sacrifices that went unseen and unappreciated. I was the silent partner in their lives, funding their whims, cleaning up their messes, and in return, I was granted the privilege of being ignored. Always there, always useful, and never ever seen. The news of Lily's engagement arrived not with a joyful phone call, but as digital confetti on my social media feed. I was at my desk, taking a 10-minute break from a grueling quarterly report, when the photo appeared. Lily's hand, adorned with a diamond the size of a small planet, artfully placed on Zach's chest. The caption was a breathless explosion of emojis and cliches about finding her forever. I felt a strange sense of detachment, as if I were watching a movie about someone else's family. Friends and distant relatives were flooding the comments with congratulations before I had even processed the news. I waited all day for a personal call, a text, anything. By the time I went to bed, my phone had remained silent. The message was clear. I was part of the audience, not the cast. A few days later, a FaceTime call finally came. Lily's face filled the screen incandescent with happiness. The ring was the star of the show. She angled her hand in a dozen different ways to make sure I saw it sparkle. "Isn't it a dream, Gracie?" she sighed before launching into a 20-minute monologue about the proposal. It was a perfectly curated story involving a surprise trip, a sunset, and a hidden photographer. I played my part, offering the requisite oohs and ahs, forcing a smile that felt like a Halloween mask. "I'm so happy for you, Lily," I said. And the tragic part was, I was. My love for my sister was a stubborn, resilient thing. A weed that insisted on growing in the most inhospitable soil. That love, that deep-seated desire to see her happy, was the hook, and they were about to reel me in, deeper than ever before. The wedding planning started with my mother's signature blend of grand ambition and learned helplessness. "We need a wedding website, Grace," she announced during a phone call a week later. "Just a simple little thing for the guests." "You're so clever with all that computer stuff, it would probably take you 5 minutes." It took me 3 weekends and countless weeknights. I researched platforms, designed a layout, curated photos, wrote their entire love story in a voice that sounded like Lily's but with better grammar, and debugged the RSVP form. The feedback was minimal and always came in the form of a demand. "The font needs to be more whimsical," Lily texted at 11 p.m. one night. "Mom thinks the pictures make her look tired. Find better ones," she messaged the next day. I was their unpaid digital consultant, their on-call web developer. My reward was a brief, "Thanks, looks good," when it was finally done. Next came the invitations. They had their hearts set on a design from a boutique stationer that cost more than my monthly rent. My mother lamented the criminal price, a performance designed for an audience of one, me. It was my cue to step in and save the day. "I can probably recreate something similar," I heard myself saying, the words tasting of resignation. I spent the next 2 weeks of my life immersed in the world of graphic design, watching tutorials, and painstakingly drawing digital peonies. I found a local printer and negotiated a deal, paying for the premium, textured cardstock out of my own pocket because I knew the cheaper option wouldn't be good enough. The cost was well over $1,000. The worst part was the assembly line. I spent an entire Saturday in my small apartment, surrounded by stacks of paper, meticulously folding, stuffing, and stamping 200 invitations. When I dropped the heavy box at the post office, my back ached and my fingers were sore. Their acknowledgement was a text from Lily a week later. "The invites are pretty, but you forgot to put a stamp on Aunt Carol's, so it came back. Not a thank you, just a criticism." My role as the wedding fixer was expanding by the day. It was a classic case of scope creep. Every problem they encountered, every logistical hurdle was outsourced to me. The photographer they wanted was already booked. "Grace, could you just make a few calls?" my mother asked. I don't have the patience for it. Making a few calls turned into a full-day project. I cold called over 30 photographers, reviewed 24 portfolios, and created a detailed spreadsheet comparing packages and prices. I found a fantastic photographer with a similar aesthetic and an open date. I even got them a discount by offering to pay the deposit up front. I presented the solution to them, and they took it without a single question about the work that had gone into it. It was magic. It was grace. The floral situation was a similar nightmare. Lily wanted a cascade of peonies for her bouquet, despite getting married in a month when they were out of season and prohibitively expensive. The quote from the florist sent my mother into a spiral of despair. "We'll have to use carnations," she wailed over the phone. "Lily's day will be ruined." I couldn't stand the thought of listening to this for the next 6 weeks, so I dove in. I spent hours researching floral wholesalers, learning about seasonal alternatives, and creating a new floral plan that used garden roses and ranunculus to mimic the look of peonies at a fraction of the cost. I put together a PowerPoint presentation, complete with inspiration photos, and walked my mother, Lily, and the florist through it on a conference call. I was part business consultant, part art director. They loved my ideas. They took all the credit. The biggest, most consuming task was the venue. They wanted a fairy tale, a rustic estate with sprawling lawns and a beautifully restored barn. Every place they found online was either booked years in advance or required a deposit that was laughable. My mother's daily phone calls became a litany of complaints and heavy sighs, each one a carefully aimed dart meant to puncture my resolve. "I just don't see how this is going to happen," she would say. "Poor Lily is so disappointed." It was a guilt trip, masterfully executed, so I became their location scout. I sacrificed my weekends to drive all over the state, touring vineyards, farms, and historic manors. I took hundreds of photos, made copious notes, and dealt with snooty event coordinators. Finally, I found it. The Oak Grove Estate. It was perfect, a hidden gem that had everything they wanted. And, by some miracle, they had a last-minute cancellation for Lily's chosen date. I called them, my voice brimming with excitement. I sent them the photos and the virtual tour. They were ecstatic. "Book it, Grace. Book it right now before it's gone," Lily screamed into the phone. I called the venue manager back. She was lovely but firm. To hold the date, she needed a non-refundable deposit of $2,500 by the end of the day. I called my mom. "Oh, Grace, can you just put it on your card for now?" she said, her voice muffled. "We're in the middle of trying on mother of the bride dresses, and my card is acting up again. It's so embarrassing. I'll transfer the money to you tonight." I knew, with a certainty that settled in my bones, that I would never see that money. The acting up credit card was a recurring character in our family's financial dramas. But I was trapped. If I said no, if I let them lose the perfect venue, I would be the villain who ruined the wedding. So I did what I always did. I gave the manager my credit card number. I read the 16 digits aloud, each one feeling like a link in a chain I was forging around my own neck. "It's done," I texted them after it was confirmed. "The venue is booked," Lily replied with a single champagne bottle emoji. In the weeks that followed, I became the primary point of contact for all the vendors. My email inbox was a relentless stream of contracts, invoices, and questions. I was juggling my actual paying job with this second, full-time, unpaid job as a wedding planner. I was running on caffeine and fumes, but I kept going, fueled by that foolish, flickering hope that my monumental effort would earn me a seat at the table. I thought that by making myself indispensable, I was securing my place in the family. I didn't realize I was just making myself the easiest person to betray. They didn't need me at the wedding. They just needed me to build it for them. Once the construction was complete, the contractor could be dismissed. The 2 days after I canceled the venue deposit were the loudest silence I have ever experienced. My phone, normally buzzing with demands and questions about the wedding, was completely still. Each hour that passed without a frantic call from my mother was another twist of the knife. It meant they hadn't noticed. It meant my single largest financial contribution to this event was so insignificant to them, so utterly taken for granted, that its absence hadn't even registered. They were floating along in their bubble of blissful entitlement, unaware that I had just popped it. The suspense was agonizing. I found myself checking my phone every few minutes, my stomach in a tight, anxious knot. I was a storm cloud waiting to break, and the waiting was worse than the rain. By Thursday evening, I couldn't take it anymore. I needed to hear her voice, to force the confrontation that she was so clearly avoiding. The ambiguity of the text message, "Lily's family doesn't want you there," was a special kind of cruelty. It was designed to be vague, to leave me questioning, to make me feel small. I needed to hear the excuse, no matter how pathetic or painful it was. I needed the finality of a conversation. I paced my small living room, rehearsing my opening line, coaching myself to stay calm, to not give her the satisfaction of hearing me break. I would be clinical. I would be direct. I would not be dramatic. I finally steeled myself and dialed her number. It rang 3 times, each ring echoing in the hollow space of my apartment. She answered with a chipper, musical, "Hi, honey. To what do I owe the pleasure?" Her voice was so light, so utterly devoid of any tension, that for a wild second, I wondered if I was losing my mind. Had I hallucinated the whole thing? "Hi, Mom," I said, my voice carefully neutral. "I just have a quick question for you." "Anything for you, sweetie," she chirped. I could hear the faint sound of a television in the background. She was probably settled in for the night, completely at ease. "What's on your mind?" I took a breath, the air feeling thick and heavy in my lungs. "I was just wondering," I began, choosing my words with surgical precision. "Is Lily getting married?" There was a fractional pause, a barely perceptible hesitation before she responded. "Well, of course she is, silly," she laughed, a brittle, unconvincing sound. "It's next month. We were going to call you. It's just been so hectic. And honestly, we weren't sure if you'd be free." "You work so hard." The lie was so lazy, so insultingly transparent, that it felt like a slap in the face. I had spent the last 3 months of my life being anything but free. I had sacrificed my evenings, my weekends, my own peace of mind for this wedding. I decided to play her game, to push against the flimsy wall of her deception until it collapsed. "I didn't even know it was happening," I said, my voice a deadpan whisper. I wanted to see how she would spin it, how she would twist reality to fit her narrative. A long, theatrical sigh came through the phone. It was the sigh of a long-suffering mother dealing with a difficult child. "Oh, Grace, please don't be so dramatic," she said, her voice laced with a familiar impatience. "Of course you knew. Don't be difficult. It's just going to be a very small, intimate affair. Just family." There it was. The word that was meant to exclude me, disguised as a word of inclusion. Just family. "I am family, Mom," I said, and despite my best efforts, my voice cracked on the last word. I hated myself for it, for showing her a glimpse of the wound she had inflicted. Her tone shifted instantly. The forced cheerfulness evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard defensiveness. "Yes, Grace," she said, her voice dropping, "but you have to admit you're always so heavy." The word landed with the force of a physical blow. Heavy. It was the perfect word, the one that summed up everything she felt about me but had never dared to say. I wasn't fun. I wasn't light. I wasn't easy. I was the one who brought up uncomfortable truths. I was the one who talked about budgets and consequences. I was the anchor that kept their fantasy-laden ship from sailing off into the stratosphere. "Heavy?" I repeated, my voice barely audible. "What is that supposed to mean?" "It means exactly what it sounds like," she retorted, now fully on the offensive. "You bring this energy with you, this seriousness. Everything is a problem to be solved, a spreadsheet to be analyzed. You can't just relax and enjoy things. Lily's new family, the Hamiltons, are not like that. They're successful, yes, but they're also light. They're fun. They know how to live. This wedding is a joining of 2 families, and frankly, Grace, you just don't fit. We want Lily's day to be perfect, happy, and carefree. We don't want any drama." The cruelty of it was breathtaking. I wasn't just being uninvited. I was being critiqued, judged, and found wanting. I was a social liability. My very being was an inconvenience to their aspirations of grandeur. The Hamiltons, Zach's family. They owned a chain of successful car dealerships and lived in a gated community. I had met them once briefly at an engagement party. Mr. Hamilton had shaken my hand limply, his eyes scanning the room for someone more important to talk to. Mrs. Hamilton had looked at my simple black dress with a flicker of disdain before turning away. They were everything my mother aspired to be, effortlessly wealthy and socially secure, and I was the shabby, heavy relative who would ruin the aesthetic. So let me get this straight, I said, my voice dangerously calm. The tremor was gone, replaced by a glacial rage. You are kicking your own daughter out of her sister's wedding because you're afraid she'll embarrass you in front of some rich people you've known for 5 minutes. That is a crude way of putting it, and you know it, she snapped. This is about protecting Lily. She is under a lot of stress, and she doesn't need your negativity. A truly supportive sister would understand this. She would want what's best for Lily and gracefully step aside. There it was again, the ultimate weapon in her arsenal. My love for my sister, twisted and used against me. For years, the threat of not being a good sister had kept me in line, kept me writing checks and solving problems. But hearing it now, after everything, it had lost its power. It sounded hollow, manipulative, and obscene. A good sister? I laughed, a short, bitter sound. I have been nothing but a good sister my entire life. I have been a good daughter. I have been your personal ATM, your unpaid assistant, and your on-call therapist. I have poured my time, my energy, and my money into this family, and specifically into this wedding. This wedding that you are now banning me from. That perfect carefree day for Lily? I built it. The website she loves, I made it. The invitations you got so many compliments on? I designed and paid for them. The vendors who are all confirmed and ready to go? I'm the one who negotiated their contracts. And the beautiful exclusive venue, Mom? The Oak Grove Estate? The only reason you have that venue is because my credit card is the one on file for the deposit. The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. It was a complete void. I had finally, after 3 decades, said something that had rendered her speechless. I could almost hear the gears turning in her head as she processed the information, as the reality of her own ingratitude and my hidden contributions crashed down on her. What? What are you talking about? She finally stammered, her voice small and uncertain. I'm talking about the $2,500 deposit I paid with my own money because your card was conveniently acting weird, I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. I'm talking about the fact that you think my support is a burden. You call me heavy, Mom? Fine. Let's see how light you feel when you have to carry the weight of this wedding by yourself. I didn't wait for a reply. I didn't want to hear the sputtering excuses, the frantic backpedaling, the inevitable attempt to turn this all back on me. I had said my piece. I had drawn the line. I pressed the red button on my screen, ending the call, and with it a lifetime of one-sided sacrifice. My whole body was shaking, but for the first time in as long as I could remember, I didn't feel heavy. I felt weightless. After ending the call with my mother, the adrenaline that had been coursing through my veins gave way to a cold, crystalline clarity. The rage was still there, a simmering coal in the pit of my stomach, but it was now focused. My mind, trained for years to find order in chaos and logic in numbers, kicked into high gear. She had called me heavy. She and Lily and my father had treated me like a utility, a resource to be exploited and then discarded. The emotional argument was over. They were incapable of understanding it. It was time to speak to them in the only language they truly respected, money. It was then that I turned to my secret weapon, the digital archive of my own exploitation. It was a folder on my laptop, innocuously labeled Household Projects, but inside was a meticulously organized testament to a decade of their financial negligence and my silent support. I had started it years ago, not with any grand plan of future revenge, but as a mechanism for self-preservation. There were times when the gaslighting was so intense, when they made me feel so crazy for feeling used, that I needed to see the raw data to confirm my own sanity. The spreadsheet inside, Harper Family Ledger, was my anchor to reality. Opening that file felt like opening a vault. Each line item was a ghost, a memory of a crisis I had been called upon to solve. I started a new tab, titling it Final Reckoning. This wouldn't just be a record anymore. This would be an invoice. I began by documenting the call with my mother, noting the date, time, and the key phrases, "You're too heavy," "Just family," "You don't fit in." Then, I started compiling the evidence, not just for myself, but as if I were preparing a case for a judge. I was building an audit of my own life. I went back to the beginning, to my father's catastrophic investment. I found the original folder for that year. It wasn't just a line item for $5,000 anymore. I unearthed the scanned image of my bank statement from that month, showing my savings account, which I had painstakingly built up to $5,734. I highlighted the outgoing wire transfer for exactly $5,000. Then I attached the screenshot of my balance the next day. $734. I remembered that week with a visceral clarity. I had survived on crackers and the free coffee at work. I had walked the 2 miles to my office every day because I couldn't afford the bus pass. I had lied to friends, telling them I was busy when they invited me out, because I was too ashamed to admit I was completely broke. While I was rationing my existence, my mother and sister were at a spa, de-stressing from the financial scare I had single-handedly resolved. I found the Facebook post of them in their white robes and saved a screenshot, placing it next to my bank statement in the file. The visual contrast was damning. Next, I moved to Lily's tab, which was more like a novel. The $3,800 eviction bailout was the headline act. I had the screenshot of the PayPal transfer, but I dug deeper. I found the string of text messages from her. Reading them again made my stomach churn. The frantic, manipulative tone was so clear now. Gracie, I'm literally going to be on the street, please. I'm so scared. Zach is trying so hard, it's not his fault. I'll pay you back with his very first paycheck. I swear on my life. I remembered the pressure, the manufactured urgency that had made me sell my grandmother's stocks. I went to my brokerage account and pulled the trade confirmation, showing the loss I had taken by selling in a down market. That loss was part of the cost. I added a new line item, market loss on forced stock sale, 412.88 Ds. Then I found her Instagram post from 2 days later, the one of the new, expensive puppy. I screenshotted it, along with the comments from her friends gushing about how adorable he was. I juxtaposed it with a screenshot of my own student loan statement from that same month, a payment I had struggled to make. My money, intended for her survival, had been used to buy a purebred dog while I was meticulously paying off the debts I had incurred for my own sensible education. I went through the dozens of smaller transactions, the endless Venmo and PayPal requests, for groceries, for the electric bill, for gas. Each one was a small leak, but together they had created a flood. For each transaction, I added a note. A memory of what that money had cost me. The $200 for her car repair was the money I had set aside for a new pair of work shoes I desperately needed. The $150 for her textbook was the weekend trip with friends I had to back out of. Each dollar they had taken from me was a piece of my own life I had been forced to sacrifice. My mother's medical bills were next. This was a sensitive one, but her callousness had burned away any hesitation I felt. I logged into her patient portal, which I still had access to from the last time I had to help her figure it out, and downloaded every invoice I had paid over the past 5 years. There were dozens. Co-pays for specialists, costs for procedures her insurance deemed elective, expensive prescription medications. The total was over $6,000. I saved each paid invoice as a PDF, my name and credit card number clearly visible at the bottom of each one. I remembered the conversations we'd had, her sighing over the phone about the cost of her health, never once asking how these bills were being paid, just assuming the problem would magically solve itself. I was the magic. Finally, I got to the most recent and painful tab, Lily's wedding. This was the freshest wound. I meticulously documented every expense. The $2,500 venue deposit, now fortified with the cancellation receipt showing the money was gone for good. The $150 for the invitations, complete with the printer's invoice. The $145 for postage. I found the receipt for the Canva Pro subscription. I even went through my phone records and calculated the time I had spent on calls with vendors, logging it as unpaid wedding coordination labor, and assigned it my standard freelance hourly rate. The total for the wedding alone was over $5,000 in direct costs and billable hours. As I dragged the final screenshot into the folder, the scale of it all hit me. The grand total at the bottom of my spreadsheet was a number that made me feel dizzy. $47,387.88. That was a down payment on a house. It was a new car. It was an investment in my own future that I had instead gifted to people who saw me as an inconvenience. Staring at that number, I felt a profound shift inside me. The hurt and the sadness were still there, but they were now overshadowed by a cold, hard resolve. This document, this collection of receipts and screenshots, was more than just a personal record. It was my declaration of independence. It was the story of my life in their service, written in the only language they would ever be able to understand. I saved the final version as a PDF, a single comprehensive file that laid bare the truth of our relationship. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do with it, but I knew one thing for certain. They thought they had all the power because they could decide who was in and who was out. They were about to find out that real power doesn't come from social status. It comes from knowing the truth and having the receipts to prove it. The week after the phone call with my mother was a strange, suspended limbo. I had detonated a bomb in the heart of my family, and yet the fallout was eerily quiet. There were no follow-up calls, no angry texts, No attempts at an apology or an explanation. The silence was their answer. They were closing ranks, circling the wagons, and I was firmly on the outside. Part of me was relieved. The other, smaller part, the part that still foolishly craved their love, felt the sting of that silence as the ultimate confirmation of my disposability. I spent the week in a haze of methodical detachment, working, eating, sleeping, all while the massive emotional event I had just triggered echoed in the background of my mind. I had my spreadsheet, my folder of receipts. I had my truth, but I was still alone with it. Then, on a Friday afternoon, the envelope appeared. It was tucked between a stack of junk mail and a utility bill in my building's small brass mailbox. It was a standard manila yellow envelope, flimsy and cheap. There was no return address, just my name and address written in neat, anonymous block letters. I stared at it for a long moment, a prickle of unease running down my spine. My family, for all their faults, were not the types for mysterious, handwritten correspondence. This was something else. I took it upstairs to my apartment and set it on the kitchen counter, regarding it with suspicion. I made myself a cup of tea, my movements slow and deliberate, delaying the moment I would have to open it. Who would send me something like this? I ran through a list of possibilities, each more unlikely than the last. Finally, with my tea steaming beside me, I picked it up. The paper was thin, and I could feel a small stack of what felt like folded printouts inside, along with something small and square. I tore open the flap. Inside was a stack of about 10 pages, screenshots printed on cheap copy paper. The quality was grainy, but the words were sharp and clear. It was a group chat. The header read, "Lily's Bridal Bishes." My heart began to pound a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. Below the header were the profile pictures of the participants. Lily, her two best friends from college, her cousin, and Zach's sister. It was the bridesmaid group chat. My hands trembled as I read the first page. The conversation was dated a few weeks back, right after I had agreed to handle the venue deposit. Lily, "You guys, my sister is a literal ATM. I told her mom's card was broken and she paid the venue deposit without even blinking. LMAO. Zach's sister. No way. That's amazing." Zach said she was kind of weird and intense. Lily, "Oh, she is. Super serious. But she's useful. We just have to play the poor little me card and she opens her wallet. Works every time. I had to sit down." The casual cruelty, the calculated manipulation laid bare in black and white, was nauseating. This wasn't just passive neglect. This was an active, conscious strategy of exploitation. I was a mark, a game they were playing. I flipped to the next page. This conversation was about the wedding cake. They were discussing a multi-tiered creation from a high-end bakery that cost a fortune. Friend 1, "How are you guys paying for that cake?" "It's like $2,000, Lily. Don't worry. We'll get Grace to pay for it. I'll tell her it's my one big dream for the wedding. She'll fall for it, cousin. Are you sure?" "That's a lot to ask." "Lily, please." She gets off on being the martyr. She'll act all burdened by it and then pay for it to prove how responsible she is. It's her whole personality. Her whole personality. The words stole the air from my lungs. Everything I thought was a sacrifice made out of love, they saw as a pathetic character flaw to be exploited. My sense of duty, my reliability, it was all just a joke to them. A punchline. I kept reading, my vision blurring with tears of pure rage. The conversation turned to me, personally. Zach's sister. "So is your sister coming to the rehearsal dinner?" Zach feels awkward around her. "Lily, God no. I'm trying to figure out how to handle that. She's not coming to the wedding either." Friend 2. "Wait, what? You're not inviting your own sister?" "Lily, you don't get it. The Hamiltons are all about appearances. Grace is just drab. She has no style, she doesn't know how to talk to people, and she just radiates this depressing energy. Zach doesn't even like her. He told me she gives him the creeps." Zach's sister. "He didn't say creeps. He just said she's very quiet." Lily. "Same difference. Anyway, Mom agrees. We need this day to be perfect. She's the one thing that isn't. I'll make sure she's not there. I'll just have Mom send her a text or something. Easier that way." There it was. The entire conspiracy. It wasn't about the Hamiltons not wanting me there. It was about Lily. It was about my own sister. So ashamed of me. So terrified that my drab, heavy presence would tarnish the perfect image she was trying to project, that she orchestrated my removal. She was the architect of my humiliation, and she had used our mother as the messenger. My hands were shaking so badly that the papers rattled. At the bottom of the stack, I found the small square object I had felt earlier. It was a sticky note, a bright pink square against the grim black and white of the printouts. On it was the same block lettering from the envelope. "You deserve better. Kay. I knew who it was. Kay was their cousin, the one who had questioned Lily in the group chat. The quiet one, the one who, like me, often seemed to be on the periphery of the family's louder, more dazzling personalities. She had seen it all, and she had decided to do something. She had sent me the truth. She had given me the one thing I didn't have, irrefutable proof of their intent. This envelope changed everything. My spreadsheet was the story of their actions, of the financial toll, but these screenshots were the story of their hearts. They revealed the malice, the contempt, the deep, dark ugliness that lay beneath the surface of our family. My plan had been to quietly disappear, to let the canceled venue be my final, silent statement. But this required a response. They had not just excluded me. They had mocked me, plotted against me, and slandered me to the new family they were so desperate to impress. My silence was no longer an option. It was a luxury they hadn't earned. Kay's note said I deserved better. And I realized she was right. I deserved to have the truth heard, not just by me, but by everyone. The curated, perfect fairy tale they were building was a house of cards, and this envelope was the gust of wind that was going to bring it all crashing down. The night of the rehearsal dinner, I was a ghost at a feast I had paid for. I had spent the day preparing, not with anger, but with a chilling sense of purpose. The initial fiery rage had cooled into something harder and more durable. Resolve. I called a friend of a friend, Kristen, who worked in digital forensics. I sent her the images Kay had sent me and asked her one simple question. Can you verify that these are real and unaltered? She called me back within an hour. They're clean, she said. Timestamps are consistent. No signs of digital manipulation. Whoever sent you, these sent you the real deal. With that confirmation, my last flicker of doubt was extinguished. I chose my outfit with the care of a general preparing for battle. Not a power suit, not a revenge dress. I wore a simple, elegant pair of black trousers and a cream-colored silk blouse. I wanted to look calm, serious, and utterly unflappable. I wanted to be the picture of the composure they had always accused me of weaponizing. My hair was pulled back in a neat, low ponytail. My makeup was minimal. I was not there to cause a scene. I was there to present evidence. The venue was a picturesque vineyard an hour outside the city, the very picture of rustic elegance. Strings of fairy lights twinkled between the gnarled branches of old oak trees. Guests in expensive cocktail attire mingled on a stone patio, sipping wine and laughing. The air was filled with the soft clinking of glasses and the murmur of polite conversation. It was a perfect, beautiful lie, and as I walked up the gravel path, I could feel the invisible price tags on everything. I had researched the caterer. I had gotten the quote for the string quartet playing softly in the corner. I had helped pay for this illusion. I walked through the archway and onto the patio. For a few moments, no one noticed me. I was, as I had always been, invisible. I saw my father holding court, telling a loud, booming story to Mr. Hamilton. I saw my mother, fluttering around Mrs. Hamilton, her laughter a little too high-pitched, a little too eager. And I saw Lily, standing beside Zach, looking like a princess in a white dress, her smile radiant. She looked happy. She looked carefree. She had no idea the storm was about to break. Zach saw me first. His smile faltered, and a look of confusion, then alarm, crossed his face. He nudged Lily, and her head turned. When she saw me, her radiant smile vanished, replaced by a mask of pure shock, followed by a flash of anger. The color drained from her face. My mother noticed their reaction and followed their gaze. Her eyes widened and she took an involuntary step back, as if I were an apparition. The soft murmur of conversation began to die down as people noticed the sudden tension. I didn't say a word. I simply walked past them, my footsteps steady on the flagstones, and moved toward the head table, where the wedding party was supposed to sit. On the table, next to the floral centerpiece I knew had cost a small fortune, I placed a small, black, Bluetooth speaker. It was no bigger than my fist. I turned to face the room. All eyes were on me. The string quartet had trailed off into silence. You could hear the crickets in the fields beyond. "Good evening, everyone," I said, my voice clear and even, amplified slightly by the speaker's microphone function. "For those of you who don't know me, my name is Grace. I'm Lily's sister." I let the words hang in the air for a moment. I looked at Lily, whose face was now a thunderous mask of fury. I looked at my mother, who was shaking her head slightly, as if to ward me off. "I know I'm not supposed to be here," I continued, my voice remaining steady. "I was told quite clearly that I wasn't welcome, that my presence was too heavy for such a light and carefree occasion." A few confused whispers rippled through the crowd. Mr. and Mrs. Hamilton were looking at my parents, their eyebrows raised in question. "I've spent a lot of my life being the useful sister," I said. my gaze sweeping the room before landing back on Lily. The one who fixes things, the one who pays for things, the one who makes problems go away. And I was happy to do it because I love my sister. But I recently learned that my support wasn't seen as love. It was seen as a weakness to be exploited. I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. With a few taps, I connected it to the speaker. "I'd like to share a few words from the maid of honor herself," I announced. A little peek behind the curtain of this perfect fairy tale. And then I pressed play. Lily's voice, cheerful and clear, filled the stunned silence of the evening. It was a voice note, likely sent in the group chat. "You guys, my sister is a literal ATM. I told her mom's card was broken and she paid the venue deposit without even blinking." LMAO. A collective gasp went through the room. My father's face turned a dark, mottled red. My mother looked like she was going to faint. I let the recording continue. "We'll get Grace to pay for the cake, too. I'll tell her it's my one big dream for the wedding. She'll fall for it. She gets off on being the martyr. It's her whole personality." The air was thick with horror. The guests were frozen, staring at Lily as if they had never seen her before. Lily herself was as white as her dress, her mouth hanging open in disbelief. I saved the worst for last. The Hamiltons are all about appearances. Grace is just drab. She radiates this depressing energy. Zach doesn't even like her. He told me she gives him the creeps. I'll make sure she's not there. I stopped the recording. The silence that followed was absolute, profound, and devastating. Every single person on that patio had heard it. The beautiful illusion was shattered. I turned my gaze from my sister to the man standing beside her. Zach was staring at Lily, his face a mixture of shock and dawning comprehension. He looked utterly poleaxed. I looked directly at him, my voice soft but carrying in the stillness. "She told me her new family didn't want me here, but it was her all along. So I just have one question for you, Zach." I paused, letting him meet my eyes. "After hearing that, are you sure you still want to marry her?" His face, which had been pale, turned chalk white. He didn't answer. He couldn't. He just kept staring at the woman beside him, the woman he thought he knew. The silence on the patio stretched for an eternity. It was a thick, suffocating blanket of shock and humiliation. Every eye was locked on Lily and Zach, standing frozen at the head of the aisle that led to nowhere. My question, "Are you sure you still want to marry her?" hung in the air, unanswered and unanswerable. It was Zach who finally broke the spell. He took a half step back from Lily, a small but seismic movement that severed the invisible thread connecting them. He looked at her not with anger, but with a kind of horrified disillusionment, like a man waking from a dream to find a stranger in his bed. "You told me," he said, his voice low and ragged. "You told me Grace was threatening you. You said she was jealous and that she was trying to sabotage the wedding. You lied to me." My heart stopped. This was a piece of the puzzle I hadn't even known was missing. Not only had she been using me and mocking me, she had been actively poisoning me to her future husband, painting me as the villain to preemptively discredit anything I might say. She had been playing a game of chess I didn't even know I was a part of. Lily's face crumpled. The mask of indignant fury shattered, revealing the panicked child underneath. "Zach, no," she stammered, tears instantly welling in her eyes, her voice taking on the familiar theatrical desperation she had used on me so many times. "She's twisting everything. She's always been jealous of us." She reached for his arm, a practiced gesture of a damsel in distress, seeking comfort. But for the first time, the trick didn't work. Zach flinched and pulled his arm away as if her touch had burned him. "Don't," he said, the word sharp and final. "Just don't." That was the spark. The room, which had been frozen in a state of suspended shock, erupted. The collapse was instantaneous and total. My mother let out a strangled sob and rushed toward Lily, wrapping her in her arms and glaring at me with eyes full of pure hatred. "How could you do this?" she shrieked, her voice cracking. "How could you ruin your own sister's life?" My father, his face a mask of apoplectic rage, strode towards me. "You are no longer my daughter," he seethed, his voice a low growl, spittle flying from his lips. "Get out of here, now!" Behind them, the party disintegrated into chaos. The Hamiltons were huddled together, whispering furiously, their faces masks of cold patrician disgust. Mrs. Hamilton was staring at my mother and Lily's public, messy display with undisguised horror. This was the drama they had been promised they would be spared, and here it was, served up as the main course. The other guests were a murmuring sea of judgment, their polite smiles gone, replaced by avid, morbid curiosity. They were witnessing the spectacular implosion of a family, and they couldn't look away. Aunts and uncles were arguing amongst themselves, some shooting me looks of pity, others of condemnation. In the center of it all, Lily was wailing, her sobs loud and performative, while my mother stroked her hair and whispered venomous things in my direction. I stood my ground. I didn't flinch from my father's rage or my mother's histrionics. I had lived in the shadow of their tempests my whole life, and I was no longer afraid of the storm. I looked past them, past the wreckage of the evening, and met Zach's eyes one last time. He looked lost, a man whose entire future had just been revealed as a sham. Then, I addressed my family, my voice cutting through the noise with a cold, quiet authority they had never heard from me before. "Ruin her life?" I said, looking directly at my mother. "Her life is built on my money and my labor. The only thing I've ruined tonight is her ability to keep lying about it." I turned to my father. "You can't disown someone who has already been thrown away. You both made that choice a long time ago." Finally, I looked at the whole chaotic scene. My crying sister, my enraged parents, the horrified in-laws, the gossiping guests. This was the perfect day they were so desperate to protect. This was the fairy tale. "I'm not coming to the wedding," I said, the words clear and precise. "You already made that decision for me, but I've made a new decision for you. You'll have your wedding, if you can still stomach it, but you'll do it without my money, without my help, and from this moment on, without my silence." I picked up my small speaker from the table, my movements unhurried. I placed it in my purse and turned my back on all of them. I walked away from the twinkling fairy lights, from the overpriced flowers, from the ruins of my sister's carefully constructed lie. I didn't run, I walked. My footsteps on the gravel path were the only sound that mattered, a steady rhythmic crunch carrying me away from the chaos and toward whatever came next. I didn't look back. The drive home from the vineyard was surreal. The chaotic, screaming tableau of the rehearsal dinner played over and over in my head, but it felt distant, like a scene from a movie I had watched a long time ago. The visceral anger and hurt had been cauterized, replaced by a profound, hollowed-out sense of finality. I hadn't just exposed a lie. I had severed a limb. I had cut my own family out of my life, and the phantom pain was immense. But underneath the pain was the first, tentative pulse of something else. Freedom. I didn't go back to my apartment. I had been planning my exit for the past week, ever since Kay's envelope had arrived. My spreadsheet and the group chat screenshots weren't just for them. They were for me. They were my permission slip to leave. I had already found a small, furnished cottage for rent in a quiet coastal town 300 miles away. I had paid the first 6 months' rent online, a transaction that felt more significant than any I had ever made for my family. It was the first major investment I had ever made purely in myself. My resignation was submitted at work, effective immediately, citing a family emergency. The irony was not lost on me. I had packed 2 suitcases with the essentials: clothes, books, my laptop, and the box of academic awards my parents had never bothered to display. Everything else, the furniture, the kitchenware, the physical remnants of my old life, I had arranged to have donated to a local charity. So instead of going home, I drove south. I drove through the night, the highway a ribbon of asphalt unfurling before me, leading me away from the wreckage. With every mile I put between me and that life, I felt the heaviness my mother had accused me of fall away. It wasn't my presence that was heavy. It was the burden of their expectations, their needs, their endless, draining dependency. When I finally pulled into the driveway of the little blue cottage just as the sun was rising, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't realized was possible. The air smelled of salt and damp earth. I walked inside, dropped my bags on the floor, and sank onto the sofa. Then I took out my phone and performed the final act of my disappearance. I blocked Lily, I blocked my mother, I blocked my father. Then I powered the phone down, removed the SIM card, and snapped it in 2. The next day, I bought a cheap burner phone with a new number from a different area code. I needed a phone for practical reasons, but I gave the number to no one. The silence was glorious. But it didn't last. They couldn't call, but they could still email. The first one arrived 3 days later from my mother. The subject line was, "You have destroyed this family." The email was a long, rambling tirade of accusations and insults. I was selfish, cruel, and vindictive. I had publicly humiliated them. I had broken Lily's heart and ruined her future. It was a masterpiece of victim blaming. I read it, felt a faint, residual sting, and then deleted it without replying. The tone began to shift after a week of silence from me. The anger gave way to a sort of wounded confusion. A new email from my father arrived. Subject, why? It was shorter, more direct. "We don't understand what we did to deserve this, Grace. You have gone too far. Your mother is a wreck. You need to call us and fix this. Fix this." Even now, after everything, they still saw me as the fixer. They saw the gaping wound in the family not as a consequence of their actions, but as a new problem for me to solve. I deleted it. As the weeks turned into a month, a new emotion began to creep into their messages: desperation. The wedding, I found out from a brief clinical email from my cousin Kay, had been indefinitely postponed. The Hamiltons had pulled out, Zach had broken off the engagement, and Lily was a recluse in her old bedroom at my parents' house. The fantasy had crumbled and they were left in the rubble, realizing for the first time how much they had relied on me to be their structural support. The emails became pathetic. From Mom: "Please talk to us, Grace. We miss you. Lily isn't eating. This silence is killing me." From Dad: "All right, maybe we weren't perfect, but you're being childish. This has gone on long enough. It's time to come home." From Lily, for the first time, a one-line email from an account I didn't recognize: "I'm sorry. Please call me." I read her apology and I felt nothing. It was 2 words, typed out a month too late. It was the sorry of someone who had been caught, not the sorry of someone who understood the depth of the pain she had caused. It was a self-serving sorry, an attempt to alleviate her own discomfort, not mine. The final email I received before I set up a filter to send all their messages directly to the trash was from my mother. It was the one that showed me they had learned absolutely nothing. "We don't even know who you are anymore," it read. I read that line, and for the first time, I smiled a genuine, unburdened smile. She was right. They didn't know who I was. The person they knew, the quiet, compliant, endlessly useful Grace, no longer existed. I had been their fixer, their ATM, their emotional janitor. I had been a function, not a person. By vanishing, I had finally given myself the chance to become a person. They thought my vanishing act was a punishment. They didn't understand it wasn't about them at all. It was my salvation. 2 months after the rehearsal dinner, I found myself driving down a familiar road. It was a detour I hadn't planned on, a subconscious pull toward the scene of the crime. I ended up on the winding country lane that led to the Oak Grove estate. I pulled my car over across the street, idling under the shade of a large maple tree. The place was empty. The grand wooden doors were shut, the manicured lawns deserted. There were no fairy lights, no string quartet, no happy guests. In the gravel driveway, near a planter of wilting flowers, I could just make out a single faded white rose bouquet, probably tossed there in the hasty, humiliated retreat from Lily's collapsed fairy tale. The venue stood silent, a beautiful, empty stage where a play was canceled before the first act. It looked sad, but I didn't feel sad. I felt a quiet sense of closure. I reached into my glove compartment and pulled out a single, crisp, white envelope. Inside was a copy of the final invoice for the non-refundable deposit, the one I had paid. On the back of it, I had written 4 simple words: "Thanks for nothing." It was my last receipt, my final transaction with my former life. I got out of the car, walked across the quiet road, and slipped the envelope into the estate's ornate black mailbox. It was a symbolic gesture, a final letting go. I was closing the ledger. Back in my new town, in my new life, that feeling of peace has only deepened. I spend my mornings walking on the beach, my afternoons working remotely for a small firm that values my skills, and my evenings reading on the porch of my little blue cottage. The silence I live in now is not the tense, heavy silence of my old life. It's a clean, expansive silence, filled not with unspoken resentments, but with possibility. Last week, I installed a new nameplate on my mailbox. It's a small, custom-made ceramic tile that says, in simple blue letters, "This box does not accept apologies." It's my new boundary. It's my promise to myself that I will never again accept words when actions are what matter. I don't know if I'll ever see my family again. Maybe one day, years from now, true remorse will find them, and we can have a different kind of conversation. But I'm not waiting for it. I've learned that forgiveness isn't about reunion. It's about releasing yourself from the hope that they will ever be different. It's about choosing your own peace over their chaos. They thought they were cutting me out, but all they really did was hand me the scissors. I was the one who finally made the cut, and for the first time, I don't feel heavy. I feel light. If you've ever been cut out by the people you sacrificed everything for, know this: your silence, your absence, can be the most powerful statement you ever make. It's not about revenge. It's about reclaiming your life. Walk away. And if this story resonated with you, like this video, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. You're not alone.